Hello, everyone. Welcome to Standpoint, a talk show that discusses global cross-sectoral issues that significantly affect geopolitics and democracies around the world. I have two great guests, but today we have chosen a topic concerning India's parliamentary elections. Uh, you all know these are the largest democratic exercise in the world today, with nearly 970 million voters casting their votes and exercising their right to franchise. They will be electing the next government. Uh, we just had the last phase of polling done, which was done over a 2 month period, on June 1. And I think this is a very apt time to discuss a very particular concerning issue and a threat that is posed to Indian democracy by one of our largest neighbors, the People's Republic of China, or I call it as Communist China. Uh, Obviously, a lot of thinkers describe China as the greatest threat that India faces today. And of course, around the world, there are a lot of nations which find China to be a big threat. And we have seen in earlier episodes of Standpoint how Communist China interferes in democratic elections in other democracies, especially in Canada. There have been a report by their internal security and intelligence agency, CSIS, which in the last couple of years have brought out a lot of reports on how Chinese interference happens in Canadian elections. Particularly, the CSIS report mentions about how Chinese fund political parties, particularly the Liberal Party of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and also they choose certain opponents of Liberal parties from the Conservative Party to fund their elections and to keep them on their side. They particularly choose left-leaning politicians and people who are sort of friendly towards China and policies that are concerning China within Canada. I mean, that's what the report talks about. And the funding also happens through various means, including asking businessmen to donate to particularly the Pierre Trudeau Foundation that Justin Trudeau's father, it is in his name, Justin Trudeau's father's name. And of course, there are historical reports how Pierre Trudeau has been very friendly with China and how he took a lot of help from China in his own election campaigns and to win elections there. Today, we will examine the just concluded Indian elections and see how China has tried to influence, what are the means they have been adopting. Um, it's very difficult to get evidences, as I was just discussing with Dr. Sriparna, who's our guest today. However, we'll try and find out what are the means that they adopt and if there are any traces of those means that they've adopted in Indian elections this time. In fact, I want to mention about the Law and Society Alliance's publication, which came out in 2021, which talks about China's footprints and influence operations in India, which exhaustively covers 9 critical sectors in India where the Chinese influence happens in different means, in fact. And it will be a very good read for people who are interested in this particular subject. And you can access this report on our website, lawandsocietyalliance.in. Just last week we had a report where ChatGPT creator OpenAI mentions about how an Israeli intelligence firm was used for pushing out various propaganda material concerning Indian elections through their very disruptive and deceptive tools that they have. And this has created a lot of political heat in India, and that is why this particular subject is of great importance. Against this background, we have decided to discuss this topic of Chinese influence on India's or the world's largest democratic exercise in India to elect in the next government. And let me introduce my guest today. We have Dr. Sriparna Pathak. She's an associate professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs, which is part of the OP Jindal Global University at Sonipat, which is not too far away from Delhi, where we are today, from where we are hosting this event. She's an expert on international affairs. I have had a close association with her. She's a personal friend, and I regard her work very highly. And we have also had the opportunity to work together in a Taiwan-based think tank called as Double Think Lab, which does track influence operations by the Chinese, and they have had the opportunity to collaborate and work together. And I think we'll continue to collaborate on this particular subject of China's influence operation in India, especially on the Indian elections. If you need to know more about Dr. Sriparna's work, please do go to the Jindal School of International Affairs website on the uh, Jindal Global University's site to take a look at her profile. And also, if you just do a internet search on her, you will find a lot of work that she has done. So, and I believe it will be very helpful for people who are interested in understanding this subject. We also have another friend of mine, Rohit Bharadwaj, Rohit Sharma, as I call him. He is the director and head of research at a Bengaluru-based tech startup called as ThinkFi, which collaborates with IIT Bangalore, which is a tech educational institution. Uh, uh, by the way, Sriparna Pathak mentors this particular Think 5 startup in their research work, and they have been doing some excellent work in the recent times. In fact, they had two excellent reports in the recent times, which I really appreciated and also used it in some of my presentations, which I had done in the recent times. In fact, ThinkFi is a partner organization of Law and Society Alliance, and we have decided to partner on research work. ThinkFi has done a recent work on how China has meddled in Taiwanese elections, particularly in the context of India-Taiwan labor agreement that was in the talks, late last year, where how China used this particular talks on the labor agreement to peddle, political propaganda within China to undermine the ruling party. Of course, the ruling party did win there ultimately, and the new president has taken over in the recent times. However, they use this material to peddle propaganda against the ruling party and also in favor of political parties that were sort of inclined towards the communist China, their neighbor. And the other one that they have done is excellent work using internet AI tools to identify how there are several bots on the internet and social media, which kind of use big events like the IPL finals, cricket tournament finals that happened in the recent time, where KKR won the match. They have used that particular event to gain traction and also to gain credibility. But however, these same bots and these same handles have been found to be peddling election propaganda in India in the recent years. I think Rohit is the best person to talk about it. So let's dive into this particular subject. We will not take too long. We're going to be keeping it very short and sweet. Just the crux of the issue. Let me first come to Dr. Sriparna Pathak. Please tell us. She has done a lot of research work on China's bid to influence Indian parliamentary elections in the recent months. What does your study reveal? Have you kind of found some evidences in this regard? You've been carefully examining this effort by China. Of course, China does influence elections in democracies around the world. We all know about it. I just gave you the example of Canada. There have been reports from UK. There have been reports from US and other parts of the world where democracies are under big threat from the communist Chinese in terms of the election influence that they do. What are your findings? Let us understand that from you first.
Thank you so much again for having me on board. And I'm really grateful that you gave me the opportunity to share the platform with Mr. Bharadwaj. ThinkFi does a lot of great work. You do a lot of great work. Coming to the disinformation, even before the elections, Meta had stated that India is at the biggest disadvantage of disinformation. Now, this was before the elections. On the 31st of May, just 2 days ago, there's been a revelation by Meta which says that it has removed China linked Facebook and Instagram accounts which have been targeting India as part of something called the Operation K. And these accounts were posting in English and Hindi on the Khalistan movement, killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, criticism of the Indian government. And this was, of course, done to influence not just the electorate within India, but also our diaspora living abroad, because the diaspora has linkages to their families living inside India, which is going to cast the vote. So this was one thing. You already gave the example of the Israeli commercial whole setup to co-opt anti-BJP sentiments. There's been another instance which has just come up today, which says that India's intelligence agencies have been supplied with some recorded conversations of 17 YouTube India employees who have been explicitly writing and speaking and talking about instructions on how to shadow ban any neutral coverage and to promote anti-BJP, anti-Narendra Modi sort of narratives. Now, the ones that Meta has come up and said that these are explicitly China funded, that's easy to find out that this is China funded and they're trying to interfere in our elections. But then the ones which are which are, you can't find the explicit link, that is the bit which becomes a bit that becomes very difficult to find out if it's actually China sponsored. What exactly is it trying? So what I generally do is that I use European Union's FIMI network, foreign interference and manipulation of information, because they give out clear-cut guidelines. Just one example: if you see a lot of handles posting using the same hashtag and the same image, you put them out in an Excel sheet, and you basically find out as to how many of these there are. Once you have that, you look at the timing at which they are posting. These will be coordinated, the timing will all be coordinated, because either these would be bots or these would be funded people who are doing it. It'll be the same narrative, it's going to be the same cut paste sort of thing, and it's going to be the same sort of imagery. And of course, if you dig a little further, you can find out, if it's a website, for example, it's very easy to find out the IP address, who it is funded by, and so on. A lot of times, a lot of this garbage comes on Twitter. Why Twitter? Because Indians use Twitter the most: Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So you will see a lot of these, handles which will not have a photo at all, using the same hashtags, using the same imagery, and churning out a certain narrative, which will be against the ruling party, because China would not want a strong party to be in power. That doesn't work for them. They did that in Taiwan, they're doing that in India as well. And then you check the dateline, and there's this long list of how you can actually track down where it is funded from. In addition to the FIMI, there's also the disarm framework by the disarm network, which you can use and actually track. It's a little too technical, but it you can, if you do a lot of digging around, you can find the work. So to just to make this a bit more crisp, there has been a lot of attempts from China to expand the fissures inside of India's polity. So which is why they will churn out a lot of narratives on the north south divide, or they will churn out a lot of narratives on Hindutva or on fascism in India. If you can use these hashtags and find out, you'll see a lot of Chinese handles doing this. They also are doing it in Chinese. Why in Chinese? No one in India reads Chinese. But the thing is, AI is so smart nowadays that the moment you see even a tweet in Chinese, it automatically translates into English. Even if that's not the case, it goes into other countries, primarily Pakistan, wherein it is translated into English, and then it enters in the Indian social media space, wherein there's a lot of churning and there's a lot of narrative creation, which then divides the Indian society further, trying to impact the electorate's choices. So, from my research so far, there has been a lot of attempt to churn out pro-Congress and anti-BJP narratives, hitting out at things like the Ram Mandir inauguration, or even in terms of foreign policy. You mentioned the India-Taiwan Labour Mobility Pact. There's also a narrative coming out against India's sale of the BrahMos missiles to the Philippines, and as to how it's a drain on the ordinary person's coffers. So we are ending up paying taxes for a useless missile. Or that BJP is a hate mongering party, which is why it's arming Philippines and which is going and fighting China. These sorts of narratives, and these are the divides that they are playing on.
Right, that's interesting. I mean, in your research, I mean, you have cited number of instances and number of events, particular events that were being manipulated by these handles, Chinese handles, and also several others who are amplifying it. So, in the amplification that happens, did you find, were there local handles that were doing it in India, or were there foreign handles that were doing it? People sitting abroad and trying to influence it, because today the social media is actually a global village where everybody knows everybody, sort of a thing. So, what is the trend that you find in terms of who's kind of amplifying these posts? Probably its origins lie somewhere in China. Probably the origin lies somewhere in India, but kind of who's amplifying it, and what is the trend that you see in this regard?
The amplification is done by, say, people within India, because once the narrative can reach the local populace, then it starts acting upon it, and the same hashtags will be used. Look, it starts from abroad. Then either it has two ways. One, either it can go to other countries, get further amplified, and then come to India, wherein our own population amplifies it, or it comes directly to India, wherein our population amplifies it. So a lot of times what happens is that it's very difficult to differentiate between disinformation and misinformation. Misinformation is, of course, when people, due to some sort of disgruntlement or their own democratic views, want to take an alternative stand. That is fine, but then even that misinformation doesn't get as much traction as disinformation from China does, because China also uses a lot of bots or AI to further that narrative. What I find in my research so far is that when it does come from China, it has been amplified in India the most. Our own people have been somehow been prey to it, and they have amplified the same narratives further.
Yeah, the Chinese government does run a 50-cent army that they have that kind of amplifies it, and probably they do counter narrative, they do narrative, all sorts of disinformation, misinformation. And you rightly pointed out that. And of course, there are a lot of people within the country also who are sort of, getting into this business. I mean, I call it business particularly because there is some kind of a pecuniary benefits that they get in terms of material benefit or in terms of cash benefit that they get. Have you sort of been able to identify anything of this sort happening, or is there any evidence that has come out, or is it still at a stage where it needs more investigation?
um, it's very difficult to find out the money trail, because it's something which only the government can do, especially if you identify someone, and then if there are charges against him or her, only then can you actually dig into his or her bank accounts and check out what are the sorts of transactions he or she has been having. But say, as just as a researcher, as a civilian, it's very difficult to track the money trail. And that's like, it's without evidence. So that's problem. Or unless it's someone like the news click, the whole news click story, wherein the government comes in, then yes, there is evidence. But otherwise, the evidence in monetary terms is a little bit difficult to establish. But what is easy, or what can be established, is the concerted, coordinated effort from a state actor, that there is, like, let's try and expand the fissures in any particular society.
But are there any other allurements? I'm trying to, kind of get a fix on what sort of, allurements drive this kind of, participation that happens. Of course, there is an ideological orientation that kind of drives them to do it or inspires them to do it. But are there any other, underhand dealings? It may not be monetary, but it can be in other gestures. So, are there anything that you come across, or you see being used by the Chinese, particularly the embassy out here? And I have come across one particular. I mean, it's yet to be documented properly by me, but one instance that I've seen is that there are about 200 odd companies in India, particularly Chinese companies in India, with investment by the Chinese in some Indian companies, where they have their expats working here in India in this region, and I get to know that they get a double salary, one salary in China and one salary in India, and the Indian salary is given in the Indian currency, and this particular the so-called salary is actually pooled by the Chinese intelligence chaps, and then it is distributed among the people who are working for them in the influence operations area. So that, I mean, that is something which I've come across, which I've heard of, or which I've also seen a report on this regard in this regard. And of course, it needs more investigation. I agree on that part, but still, that is one sort of an allurement, monetary allurement that they do. But there are others also that come in. Like, for example, this Nepal incident, in the recent incident, where this Takshar magazine's editor, he got threatened by the Chinese ambassador in Nepal, for a news item that they put out on the Pokhara airport project that China has been funding or loaning. about the interest rates and the controversy regarding the interest rates, which I've also written about earlier for Eurasian Times in this regard. So, uh, you know, threat is one aspect. The other aspect is intimidation is one aspect. The other aspect is facilitating, say, a conducted sponsored tour of China, or a ease of visa. These are some of the things that trends, which are not pecuniary, but it is an allurement. So you see
Yes.
that, for example, another journalist, Nitin Gokhale, got threatened that your visa access will be much more difficult because during the Galwan Ladakh conflict, he wrote an article saying that Z is showing tendencies of an Hitler, Hitlerian tendencies. So after which the political secretary who was posted in the Chinese embassy threatened him both over the phone and also by email, which he kind of made public later. So, are these sort of incidents also coming to the fore?
Yes. So, for example, I think last week only there was a report of how, there were some journalists from our country who had been flown to Tibet, to show as to how developed Tibet was. So, even if it's not direct monetary transactions, it'll be these sorts of not so monetary transactions. But then, yeah, just to influence certain opinions. And these people would come back and then they would write articles which would further influence the people. So that, of course, is definitely there. That funding bit is there. So there we can understand that, okay, there has been some sort of a transaction, or even if the companies that you mentioned, that's also easy to understand. But thankfully for us, we don't have little pinks. They're not very. Our trolls are trolls. They're just trolls. They'll behave in a certain way when something happens all of a sudden, and these are like real people. They're not bots, or they are not 50 Cent Army or the little pinks which the CCP has. But yeah, because of the right to freedom of speech and expression that we have, and we have a lot of it, people generally tend to get swayed when there's an alternative ideology that is shown to you, or an alternative reality is shown to you. So because we are not the way China indoctrinates its own people, at least for youngsters, that's how it is. It's They would generally like to believe the alternative side. Now for us, the youngest population in the world is of course an advantage, but here it is where it becomes a disadvantage, because when the youth is the youth, they are very revolutionary. So if you show an alternative side, they will want to take that. And we have the youngest population in the world, all of which is, most of it at least, is sitting on the internet. So that's the sort of that's the sort of precarious situation that we find ourselves in. The money trail, of course, is there, but yes, China tries and expands the ideological fissures, and they know that in India or in South Asia, ideological or religion per se is a very big bone of contention. So the moment it can, drop a bomb, it will just explode all across the country. So that's what it does. Money trail, personally, I've not been able to track it down because I don't have the skills. But yes, the journalists or the academicians going abroad on all funded trips to China, that's very clear as to there is a certain sort of attempt to change their perceptions, and then they will further create narratives.
Yeah, the fam trip for the famished. So, I mean, wonderful insights there, Dr. Sriparna. Let me just move on to Rohit, whom I've introduced earlier, and let's see, let's understand your organization's exhaustive research that you did on this Taiwan-India labor mobility agreement that was being discussed late last year. And how do you also see and how it was used to influence the Taiwanese elections there? And also, let's talk about your research which came out recently on how the bots were using big events like IPL to gain traction and credibility before they become a menace in the Indian election. So, could you just explain what was that report all about, and what was your research all about, and what are the findings out of that?
Oh, sure, sure. Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you, ma'am, for your key insights. I'll just start with the first one that we're talking about, the Taiwan MOU that was in with the labor agreement. So it started with the false narrative around the labor agreement that was built that 1 lakh labor will be sent, and it was way before the agreement was signed. and they started creating a negative image of India in Taiwan. They started first, as ma'am said, it's all about first understanding the landscape of the target country. So there, the target was not India. The target was Taiwan because the target was the Taiwanese elections. So they don't didn't only focus on Insta, Facebook, Twitter. They focused on Dcard. That is one of the main social media there in Taiwan. So they use Twitter and Instagram, but the main focus on Dcard, and we found that they targeted both the Indian audience and the Taiwanese audience. The idea in the Taiwanese audience was to create a negative image of Indians so that they can affect the agreement, the MOU agreement, giving a bad image of the Taiwanese government. At the same time, they wanted to create a rift between India and Taiwan so that YouTubers or the content creators from India start a backlash towards Taiwan, and that happened at the end. So we analyzed the Twitter trends and the decard, and there was a big report on the uh, disinformation that was spread through decard. We analyzed that. We analyzed some bot army on Twitter that was trying to create the rift between India and Taiwan. And then at the end, as we discovered, there was a rift that we saw some content from Indian YouTubers as a hate speech toward Taiwan. So Taiwan faced backlash from India and from their people, and there was also sentiment that China was able to develop. China was able to develop a sentiment, a negative sentiments toward Indians that when Indian laborers will come to Taiwan, there will be more violence in Taiwan, and this was actually a very well inflated inside Taiwan, and so we actually it was thank God that didn't affect much in the elections, but they were able to create a rift both ways, affecting their own citizens and through Indian content creators. And to about the second report, extending on what ma'am was saying, that there's a certain way in which the bots behave. So we came across the when I was just after IPL finals, I was just scrolling through and I saw some Japanese keywords being used, like KKR1, SRH1, with Japanese hashtags, and it was very odd for me. I searched those hashtags with the current hashtags and came across a series of accounts that are tweeting in this Japanese hashtags, and there was format in which they were tweeting. So there was a video and there was an image attached in the tweet, and a similar tweet was used. So we have some in-house tools, AI tools that we use to analyze the patterns that are there in the tweet. So through the cosine analysis, that is basically dividing the text into vectors and comparing the similarity between them, we found those bots with around the tweets that they did were between 100 to 50% same in the range of all the tweets that they have done. And the second giveaway was that if we analyze all the accounts, the frequency in which they do the tweets, so all the accounts were created in less than 6 months, and the tweet count, status count were up to 5K. So normal person will not do 5,000 tweets in 5 months. That is impossible for a person. And so this was another giveaway. And when we analyze the content, it was across the domain. So it was the content apart from these IPL tweet was some were doing Ram Mandir tweets, some were doing tweets about Makkah Medina, some were Dhruv Rathi fans, some were pro Congress accounts, and some, in fact, I found one Nawaz Sharif fan account as well. So the idea was here not to just so normally if you see a bot account, so Indian election is under fire from across the globe and it is under uh, like review. But what China is doing here is not favoring any particular party or a particular group. They're trying to create a rift, a social divide. That's why they're favoring both the parties. And I feel it's my understanding because this was not the first time I came across some bot army. My understanding is that they have somehow bypass the Twitter and they create some 500 to 1000 bot on a daily basis. And these hashtags and these posts on a trending topic are a way to give them a sense of humanist feeling that okay, these are not the bot accounts, they're real accounts. And if they pass the Twitter algorithm, then these bots start tweeting on a particular domain and then they are sold to the higher bidder. So that's why you see those bots accounts tweeting about both BJP's, Congress, then other. In fact, they are sold across the world, not for India only, but across the world. But since IPL and the elections are the two hot topics, it was just a giveaway, and we came across and find out. So I feel there's certain things that you can analyze to see if they're a bot army or not, but the final outcome can be, the final analysis can be a lot different for each case because we treat each case as a different. But the starting point, as I said, can be the status counts, the creation dates, and the topics on which they're doing their tweets. So we have our capabilities using the AML tools, and we try to use this as much as we can because I feel the OSINT is still lagging a touch of technology, as we say today. So that's all my
Right.
side.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you for that wonderful work. And absolutely. I just want to close with one last question to Dr. Sriparna. Um, uh, do you think these kind of efforts, I mean, Rohit did mention that the effort by the Chinese, the 50 Cent Army in Taiwan using this India-Taiwan labor mobility agreement did not succeed. And ultimately, the ruling party came back to power there. Do you see the tactics that they've been adopted in the Indian election succeeding for China? That's a no-brainer
So,
question.
no, no, that's a wonderful question, and why the you know the reason as to why the whole disinformation against the India Taiwan Labor Mobility Pact did not work out was because the civil society in Taiwan was very robust and they fought back the disinformation. There are a lot of civil society organizations which work on disinformation. For us, I think we should also start doing the same thing and reach kind of there. But yes, the fallout could have been very big. I was in Taiwan when there was a protest which was organized against Indian laborers, and that happened in Taipei City. It was on December 3rd, I believe. I was there, and the whole thing was orchestrated on D card, as Rohit also mentioned. So yeah, it was difficult. It was sort of dangerous. Look, it might have been primarily aimed at the DPP, at the Taiwanese government, but Indians and Indian laborers got stuck in between, and there was a protest which was not. It turned out not to be a very humongous sort of event, and it went on all peacefully. But it could have taken another sort of color. It could have gone in any other sort of direction. Um, DPP won for the third time. And if we go by the same example, China tried influencing the Taiwanese elections and didn't want the DPP to come back for the third time, but the DPP came back. If we go by this example, the party that they are targeting in India is going to come back for the third time. So it's not really working out that well, because one thing I've realized about the Indian social media space is that the people who are sitting and tweeting or creating these sorts of narratives are not the actual ones who go out and vote. The ones who are voting are very different. They might be on social media, but um, fortunately for us so far, are not getting influenced that massively by all these sorts of disinformation. But this is something which we should watch out for, because in the next 10 years, it's just going to grow more and more, and this is going to become a bigger challenge for us. So if we don't start taking steps from now, like Taiwan does, it's going to be problematic. But this time, I don't think any of their efforts is going to lead to any sort of fruitful results.
Yeah, the exit polls that came out yesterday are kind of indicating that the Chinese effort to influence the Indian elections have failed. But more than that, I think it's an effort by the Chinese to create fissures within the Indian society, creating some kind of a chaos that can happen within the society. I mean, as you rightly pointed out, it's kind of a ticking time bomb. So these kind of social disharmony can break out into a big incident like what happened in Manipur. And of course, we all know that in Manipur there was a Chinese hand in that particular thing that happened. And the other dangerous thing that trend we see is that they are trying to create a fissure between two good, friendly, diplomatic uh, relations between two nations. So that's another dangerous trend. We have seen it with Canada, that is what has happened. And of course, you must be knowing that there was a report by a YouTuber who said that there was a Chinese hand in the Niger killing, but ultimately it broke out into a India-Canada spat. So, I mean, all sorts of efforts are being made to disrupt this kind of a good, friendly relations with diplomatic relations with friendly nations. So that is one big threat that we have, and also the next big threat that we see is the demographic dividend. They are trying to create a trouble for us on that front by influencing them ideologically through these kind of efforts of these content creators who put out these videos and tweets and other posts on the social media. And the third threat I see is that it's a threat to the democratic effort itself, in terms of the Indian democracy or democracy anywhere in the world, where if this kind of influence uh, can kind of disrupt the democratic process, it's a big defeat for the democratic forces around the world. I think that is another major threat. So if Advocate Dugal had joined us, we would have discussed some legal aspects of it, so that there is a cross-sectoral debate on this subject. But unfortunately, he has not been able to participate. So, and also the other big technology trend that you see is the AI tools that are enabling this kind of propaganda that is happening. So these are some of the outcomes or the takeaways from this particular discussion that we have had. And thankfully, the second time China's effort will be failing after Taiwan and India. So hopefully in a couple of days we'll know the outcome. How big is the outcome? So I thank Dr. Sriparna Pathak and also Rohit Bharadwaj for your time, and also sharing your wisdom with us. I appreciate this. We are going to be ending this show right now. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.